This is a recording about piracy. Okay, so digital piracy. Arr. So when we talk about digital piracy, what we're really talking about is intellectual property. Okay, IP, intellectual property issues, but it's commonly known as piracy. So what we're going to introduce here, well, we're going to think about what is intellectual property, what is piracy, and how does digital piracy differ from previous forms of piracy? Why is piracy a problem? I think challenges to conventional conceptions. Okay, is piracy theft? And the contribution of criminology to any discussions around piracy. So, what is intellectual property? So here we can see a couple of quotes. What is intellectual property? Intellectual property, IP, refers to creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary and artistic works, designs and symbols, names and images used in commerce. That's part of a definition from the World Intellectual Property Organization. There's also a quote here, a UK government definition. Again, similar things, gives you a sense of what it is. As we say, it's always useful to have a working definition of anything that you are thinking of studying, and certainly anything you're thinking of doing your assignment on. Okay, so again, you can see that there's a word is slightly different, but the essence is there. Okay, so it's things that we come up with. Okay, it's things that we have created, intellectual property as opposed to physical property. Yeah, and you'll find links to these definitions in the notes of the slides, and there's also links to these definitions in the relevant sections on now as well. So now we know what intellectual property is. What about piracy? So piracy is a term commonly used to describe unauthorized duplication and distribution. It used to be strongly associated with things like counterfeit CDs and DVDs, those kind of digital products. So they were digital technologies, but they were actually, interestingly, still physical products. Okay, you still had to ship a physical product even though it contained digital information. The illegal downloaded materials, including music, has been a major issue. The music industry was the first to be really hit by the issue of illegal downloads. And since then, film and television and the games industries and other producers of digital goods, okay, including big software manufacturers, okay, think of all these computer programs that people use, etc., have also been hit. But we'll, in a separate video, we look at the music industry because that gave us a sense of some lessons that were to come. So as I said, so pre-digital items, analog artifacts being things that we've created, were also pirated. But if you were to kind of have fake copies or counterfeit copies of things like books or magazines or prints or sheet music, etc., okay, they all have technical limits. It's quite difficult to do this at scale. So making analog copies of music, for example, also had very practical limits. So you just get what we call bootleg recordings and counterfeit recordings, unofficial recordings of vinyl records. Okay, but that meant you had to have access to things like a pressing plant. You've also got lots of people who were making copies of things on cassette tapes. But again, when you have a cassette tape, if you make a copy from a copy from a copy, the quality quickly degrades. Digital stuff, however, okay, so increasingly intellectual property is digital in nature. And this has got implications for the theft or unauthorized copying and redistribution of that property. Digital artifacts can effectively be reproduced perfectly and repeatedly. So you can get pretty perfect copies and at scale and at very low cost. And then these same artifacts can then be distributed to a ready market. There are lots of people who are in the market for free music, free software, free videos, etc., etc. And this has been facilitated by the internet, World Wide Web, and other technologies such as mobile phones. Okay, so we've got to be able to recreate things digitally, right? But then we have to distribute them. We've got to get them out into a market. Okay, if we don't have a way of distributing stuff, And if there isn't a demand for stuff, okay, then we don't necessarily have a problem, because people could copy things perfectly and repeatedly and at scale, right? But if they couldn't distribute it, and if there wasn't a demand for it, then it wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But because you can, there's three things that come together, okay? So we can reproduce stuff pretty much perfectly if it's digital. There's a means to distribute it, and there's a ready market for those things, okay. So why is piracy a problem? Piracy is sometimes seen as a victimless crime. No one gets directly assaulted or robbed, etc. However, people who create things for a living are potential victims. Where is the reward for their intellectual endeavours? Authors, film producers, musicians, et al. Plus a host of supporting technical trades, plus a whole infrastructure for promotion, distribution, and so forth. Okay, so piracy is not a victimless crime, although sometimes people will tell themselves this to salve their conscience. What does it matter if I download a couple of copies of this, because this is a multi-million-dollar Hollywood production, they've clearly got lots of money. This particular artist is a millionaire, they drive around in limousines, they have a nice life. What's the problem if I download this? Okay, that's an argument that can be made. But you'll find counter-argument is that those people are still victims. They're entitled to it. If they've made a decision to create things on a commercial basis, okay, they're not, sometimes people will decide to give stuff away for free, and that's a different issue, but if they decide to create stuff on a commercial basis and things that are illegally downloaded, that are unauthorized downloads, unauthorized copies, etc., then that is a problem for those people. They are victims. Is piracy theft? Right, piracy is a good example of technology outpacing legislation. People engaged in illegal downloading were accused of theft. However, under English law, theft is to permanently deprive the owner of their property. See, for example, the Theft Act of 1968. But if we illegally download something, if I make an illegal copy of something, then I've not deprived the owner of the original. The original digital copy still exists. The original digital copy may still be on the platform. The original digital copy is still there and available to the owner. Okay? So when we first encountered large-scale illegal downloading, intellectual property infringement, okay, people would talk about it in terms of theft, right? And there's a sense in which things were being stolen, yeah? But that's the kind of language that was used in everyday discussions around it. But the law is much more specific, okay? So here we have theft. A person is guilty of theft if he dishonestly appropriates property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. And thief and steal shall be construed accordingly. So if I wanted to take somebody to court, yeah, because they'd illegally copied, illegally downloaded, for example, digital materials, then I couldn't charge them with theft. So this is a good example of where technology and social practices, including potentially criminal practices, yeah, were ahead of the law. And we look at responses throughout the module to this kind of thing. So we couldn't charge people with theft because it's not theft. And people who are the victims of these illegal downloads, thinking especially at industry level, right? So the music industry, the television and movie industries, okay, they would have to cast around and look for other legislation. And the other legislation probably wasn't there at one time. So what we get is the introduction later on of new laws, right, to curb digital downloads. So this is a good example of a common theme within the module, that of the criminal justice systems, of the law not keeping up with social and specifically criminal practices. In terms of the contribution of criminology to this, then we can think about the crossover between real goods and so-called virtual goods. But these virtual goods, whether they're digital, can still, even if they're digital, okay, they can still have a real value attached to them. Okay? And then we can also look at criminological theories that might help to explain what we are seeing. And criminological theories might help us to bring in deterrent policies, things that will help reduce this type of behaviour if we consider it to be antisocial behaviour, unwanted behaviour, behaviour with negative impacts, harmful behaviour. So we're engaging in harm reduction, and can any of the criminological theories available help to inform possible policy responses to this issue? Other things we'll cover when we're considering this is the music industry as a warning to other industries. Okay. The evolving nature of piracy and changes in what things get pirated. The question of, is piracy a victimless crime, and who polices piracy? And how digital technology facilitates that piracy is something we've already touched on here. Okay, so digital artifacts we can replicate pretty much perfectly and at scale and at a low cost, and then other technologies allow us to distribute those digital artifacts, and other technologies still allow potential consumers, okay, to come into contact with potential suppliers of these pirated items. Okay, bye for now.